I've never heard of this brand before. They were brought to my attention from the channel founder of Audioholics, also of the Audioholics website. You already know who he is, so I don't need to give you an introduction. He had heard them at an audio show and said,
"Shane, you want to check these out? You have never had a pair of speakers like this before. They're different."
Well, I took him out of the box and he was right. These are different. They're not made from wood or some wood byproduct like MDF or HDF. They're made from aluminum, 606 aluminum to be exact. This might just be the most exquisitely made speaker I've ever had in my home. The seams line up perfectly and I'm positive this could stop a bullet. They're a fairly compact speaker measuring 7.5 inches wide by 17 inches high by 10.6 inches deep, and they weigh a very dense 32 pounds. It's a two-way speaker with dual 5-inch drivers that are made in Germany with an AMT tweeter that's made in the USA, designed by Mon Acoustics, which sits in this chiseled out waveguide right up front. It's got a frequency response of 45 Hz to 28 kHz. So these should have a pretty robust low end for some small speakers. It's also ported, so that'll help with the bass response. And one of the interesting tidbits about the design is that the inside of the speaker is lined with leather. Yes, leather, to keep it from having a cold metallic resonance. It's supposed to address the 1000 Hz frequency. This will give it a warmer, more nuanced sound signature, as opposed to having that colder, sound bouncing or pinging off metal feel to it. Aside from the leather interior, each side of the speaker is lined with different absorption, as you can see here in the picture. This is also supposed to give each speaker a directional characteristic, meaning there's a specific left channel and right channel, which is designated on the back of each speaker. Now for my particular setup, I've got the Mon speakers hooked up to an NAD M28 amplifier. It's one of the best measured amps Audioholics has ever come across. I've also got a Cambridge Edge preamp playing back tracks using Rune and Tidal. And going from the preamp to the speakers, I've got a pair of Kimber Cable 8TCs. Now as reference, my normal everyday speakers are a pair of Perlisten R5T towers, which by the way, you can pick up from our channel partner Dream Media. Now this won't be a comparison video, but I always like to have a reference point when I'm listening to new speakers, and the Perlistens are a fairly neutral sounding speaker. So when I sat down to listen to some of my go-to songs, I kept thinking that these were extremely warm sounding, and that 28K top-end extension was basically non-existent. I was pretty disappointed, especially given what these speakers cost. They lacked any kind of detail. So I figured maybe it's the speaker stands. These do come with really premium stands. They're made from aluminum just like the speakers, and they have adjustable spiked feet just like most other stands do. But unlike most stands, these come with ball bearings that the speakers sit on top of. The stands have these little indentations where you place the metal balls into, and on the underside of the speakers you have the same indentations. So along with the spiked feet, these and the ball bearings should also help with decoupling the speakers. I'd say if you've got children or you happen to be clumsy, this whole idea could be a dangerous proposition, because a light bump into the speaker could cause it to fall over since it isn't very stable. Otherwise, this seems like a really cool idea. And I can confirm while listening to rap music or anything with a lot of bass, I barely got any interaction with my room. My floors didn't shake and neither did my walls. It was like using isoacoustics versus regular spikes. Anyway, since these stands are only 22 inches tall, it places the tweeter at 32 inches, which is well below my ears when I'm sitting down. So I grabbed a pair of 24-inch stands, which now places it perfectly at ear height, and it also matches the height of the tweeters on the Perlistens. So not am I only now getting perfect imaging height-wise, but that crispy high-end detail was incredibly detailed. I'd even say there's a touch more sparkle on the top end over my R5Ts. The only other speakers I'd say gave me more top-end extension were the Coaxial Diablos that I just had recently reviewed on my channel. While the Coaxials did reveal more clarity than either the Mon or the Perlistens, they could also get a bit painful since they were a bit brighter. I think the PlatiMons hit a near perfect spot for having enough resolution so I could still hear the sizzle of cymbals or the close mic lip smacking in a well-recorded track, without it being overly in your face and bright or too warm and recessed. And once I got my placement just right, the imaging was pinpoint accurate. While listening to the Stones, I could clearly tell where Mick was on stage and where Keith was when he goes into a solo. So background singers were a couple feet behind the speakers, and the horizontal soundstage was just as wide as what I get with my Perlistens, even a bit wider. I'd say the most notable difference between the two speakers, aside from the much lower bass in the Perlistens, was that vocals seemed a little more warmer on the Mon speakers, so it was a touch smoother, whereas on the Perlisten it was more forward and seemed to have a tad more presence. So singers could appear more upfront, as if they were standing in line with the speakers, while the Mons placed them maybe a half foot behind. Like I said, I felt that they were really smooth in their presentation, and I felt, especially coming from the Coaxials, they were a more forgiving speaker rather than being overly analytical like the Coaxial Diablos could be. Of course, comparing a bookshelf speaker versus a tower isn't exactly fair when it comes to bass response, but given the size of the PlatiMons, they delivered on their claims of being able to play down to 45 Hz. And as you can see at my main listening seat, I got extension down to about 42 Hz in my room before it starts to drop off. And if you're wondering, this is the measurements that I got from my main listening seat. I took 3 measurements and did an average, and this is the result. My room isn't perfectly treated, so keep that in mind. If you're into pop music or rap music like I am, these can bang surprisingly hard. While playing back some Victor Wooten on Tidal, these were very clean and precise, presenting each bass note with a texture that you could almost feel in your fingers. I've heard some speakers that can sound boomy on the bass guitar and just sound a little mushy, but with the PlatiMon, the bass is very tight and controlled, which I'd attribute to the enclosure being so very dense and solid. And if we go back to the picture, you can see that there are 2 different sized ports. This is supposed to help with the port noise and keep the bass under control. Now of course, given the small size, they don't dig incredibly deep. Pairing them with musical quality subwoofers like a pair of Perlisten R210s would take it to the next level. You know, overall, if you take into consideration the immaculate build quality of the speakers and also the quality in how purpose-built the stands are, it's a compelling little package if you're looking for a highly resolving pair of speakers that I found to be far more enjoyable to listen to over longer periods of time over the much more expensive Coaxial Diablos. I'd even put it ahead of my Perlistens for being able to squeeze out a little bit more detail in the top end. Now again, the only issue that I had personally was with the height of the speaker stands themselves. With the chair that I use and the way that I sit, the tweeter height didn't work for me, so I did have to use different stands. I suppose if you had a block or something to place under the stands to raise them up, you could still have all the benefits the stands provide. This of course will be different for everyone and your use case. If you were to pair these up with some high quality subwoofers, it'd make for a very hard to beat full range setup. Now keep in mind that this is my personal subjective opinion on these speakers. You might feel different about them. Well, thanks for checking out the video, guys. Be sure to give this video a like if you found it useful, and if you want even more useful information, you should check out our Patreon page. Subscribe if you haven't already, and remember, keep listening.